Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong, happy to be with you today on this Halloween morning. It's a little chilly outside. Kids are all dressed up in their Halloween costumes, and everybody's out getting ready to trick-or-treat later today, right? I just came back from my youngest's little Halloween parade at his school, and everybody's excited to be dressed up, you know? Why not? That's not me. I'm not the type to dress up. I don't, that's just not me. I'm just going to leave it at that. But yeah, we're going to talk more Utah stuff today. We're not going to talk Halloween. But before we do that, I want to tell you about our partners, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, we're still in the thick of the bye week. This week has actually gone by relatively quickly, in my opinion. But because it's the bye week and we don't really have anybody to preview for the week, and we're gonna save all the BYU stuff for next week, I wanted to kind of do a little bit more of a breakdown on the QB situation. And I know we've talked about the QB situation at length, but because I had more time, I wanted to kind of dive into it a little bit. So we'll get into that. But before we do that, we had media availability with Kyle Whittingham on Tuesday. So after we did the podcast a day later, we got a chance to talk to him for the first time this week because they didn't do the press conference that they normally do just because of the bye week. So it's not anything earth-shattering or anything that's changed. It's just more just the bye week. So we got a chance to talk with him for a few minutes. The situation there is that I almost said Cam Rising and Isaac. It's been a long season, guys. Isaac Wilson and Brandon Rose are splitting reps this week, equally. Yep, that's where we're at. And so I don't know what to tell you. Honestly, like at this point, if you're still splitting reps with a quarterback for the quarterback battle going into week 10 of the season, you've got a problem. And obviously there is a problem, and we've documented this many times. The reality is yes, we've documented Isaac Wilson, true freshman, right? Like we're going to get into that. This is basically the whole episode about true freshmen and kind of how much of a challenge it is. But he beat out Brandon Rose in fall camp. Looked to be the better quarterback. There's a lot of potential there. They feel like he had the most upside. And now suddenly Utah is kind of playing that guessing game on who it's going to be. I documented it last week or earlier this week, about Brandon Rose. Look, 45 yards, 7 of 15 passing, so nothing too crazy. Just not the most impressive performance as a backup. Like I said, this wasn't like Cam Rising coming in the San Diego State game and kind of just completely changing the tone and momentum of the game. this was very much so similar. And, I've seen on Twitter many people say that, oh, you can see it in the player's eyes, and you can see it in how he's in the pocket. Like, I don't know that you got anything more, right? And I'm not going to pretend to know what the change to Brandon Rose means for the locker room. If anything, it's been much quieter from anybody associated with Utah recently. There's been a lot less, I don't want to call it leaks, but a lot less people talking. And so it's been much more difficult to be able to get stuff. I do know, in some conversations that I have, that there's still some guessing games out there. There's also some aspects where Isaac Wilson has been partially injured, right? We saw in that Arizona game he got injured with his knee. He got thrown down into the ground on Saturday in the end zone, hurt his non-throwing hand as well as kind of banged up his shoulder. All of those can be contributing factors, and you kind of saw his numbers dive a little bit once he got injured. But he continues to fight. Kyle Whittingham admitted that he's been injured. He says he's been pretty banged up this year, but he's a tough kid, wants to be out there, and so if you're out there, you've got to perform. So, I mean, there's truth to that, right? Like, if you want to be out on the field and you want to kind of stick it out, you do have to perform. So there's nothing wrong there with what Kyle Whittingham said. However, on that same vein, they let Cam Rising play that entire Arizona State game, absolutely hurt, and they were unwilling to make a change. So I don't know that it's fully, the same. I mean, obviously Cam Rising compared to Isaac is different in the sense that you're probably going to trust Cam a little bit more and give him a little bit more leeway than you would somebody like Isaac. But at the same time, the messaging hasn't been consistent. And so that becomes a challenge. And, we get it, right? Like, Isaac is being thrown into a tough situation. And if he does want to stick it out, that's good for him. And he wants to move forward. And he does have to move the ball, right? Like, you can't just be the tough guy and go out there and perform or go out there on the field and not perform. And so there's a balance there, right? And so, what Utah does with this decision is going to be interesting. I don't know, barring some, last-minute changes, that Brandon Rose gives you anything better than what Isaac has done so far, right? So I don't know. I think this will be really interesting to see how they develop. I know that's a hot take for some people. Personally, just being around this program for a long time, the fact that Brandon has not gotten that love in the last few years, especially, and I'll point out, especially last year in the Las Vegas Bowl, Bryson Barnes was hurt beyond belief. He was loaded up on medication. He was not feeling great. Obviously wasn't able to perform at the level that Utah needed him to, and Utah didn't make the move to Brandon Rose. He was on the sideline warming up the entire time. I think that kind of tricked a lot of people into thinking that we were going to see Brandon Rose. The reality is he just wasn't ready. And Kyle got a little snippy with media at the end of the bowl game saying that Brandon's just not ready for that moment, right? And so I'm not saying there's not a lot that can change, but I don't think, based on this system, the fact that a true freshman comes in and beats you out, that suddenly things are going to just, the light switch is going to turn on, right? I think they have faith in what he can do, but I just don't think that it's to that level where you're looking at it and saying, oh, you have Cam Rising in the background as the backup, we can put him in and get a jump start. No, I don't think you're in that situation. On Saturday, you had Luke Batari as your third quarterback, at least in the traveling squad. Walk-on obviously has played one game against Colorado last year and got the win. It was serviceable in that. And then you have Sam Heward, who wasn't on the travel squad and has kind of been lost in that mix. And the understanding was that he would be QB3, and things have changed. So where Utah goes, I don't know. Honestly, you could make a case as to Utah mismanaging this, and it's not wrong to an extent. We've talked about this. They put all their eggs in the basket that Cam Rising was going to be healthy this year, and they were going to ride him to a championship, right? And I don't think that they were necessarily wrong, because if Cam was healthy, they were going to be fine. I think there were still problems that this Utah offense, needed to correct, aka red zone and some of the stuff in the offensive line. But, somebody like Cam is able to erase a lot of that, right? It's a big eraser when you've got a guy that can just make plays and kind of understand what he needs to do. Now you're sitting here with, you had a lot of this faith in Isaac Wilson, but you never really thought you were going to go to him, or at least you weren't going to go to him in large portions of games, right? It was going to be mop-up duty, if at all. There was a potential that you could redshirt him, which, we don't need to get into that because red shirts, I think, are a waste anymore. Not that they can't be beneficial, and I think if if you're not able to get on the field that first season, it's absolutely valuable. But at the same time, in terms of preserving eligibility, I don't know that it matters. At the end of the day, Isaac, whether he redshirted or played this year, I think experience matters. Now, I'll point out here in a little bit why a redshirt season for a quarterback especially is important, but I think in terms of eligibility, it doesn't really matter, right? The good players, they want to leave in 3 years. They want to get to the NFL. Having 1 year taken away from them doesn't necessarily change anything. So that's where they're at, right? And so you put all these eggs in the basket and say that, this is where it's going to be. It's going to be Cam Rising. Everything's going to be great. He's our hero and everything. That's kind of the rhetoric that was being said. Okay, maybe not the hero part, but, you kind of build up that hero mentality where, he's going to come in and save the day. And then our season after last year, which once again, you were without Cam Rising, was terrible. It was better than this year in terms of wins and everything, especially against a tougher schedule. There's a lot of cracks that have shown, right? And so you've got somebody like Kyle Whittingham is trying to do his best to be able to help the players that are currently here that are going to graduate or do whatever. Maybe, the Dorian Singers, the Brant Keithys, the Mekhi Bernards, those types of players. He wants to give them the best opportunities they can to be able to succeed. And so whether that means changing Isaac Wilson to Brandon Rose, and if that makes sense, that's a debate for another time. But at the same time, they're just not in the situation because they haven't been able to manage it in the way that they want to. Now, part of that is on Cam. Cam hasn't been able to play for the last 2 years, and so when you have a guy like that who is expected to be the starter, you're just not going to get quarterbacks from other programs that are transferring in that are going to take you seriously. They may entertain it, but the fact that Cam is always going to be in the back of the mind, you're just not going to bring in a veteran guy, whether that's last year or this year. And yeah, you can argue that Sam Hewer did, but at the same time, he came in late. You can't expect him to come in a month before fall camp and jump into it, especially the offense that Utah had with Andy Ludwig, right? It's still their offense right now. Nothing's changed. Like I said, there's some wrinkles with Mike Bajakian, but like the same thing is essentially there. And so to try to get a quarterback acclimated into that doesn't work. Now, the reality is I personally think that Tyler Huntley and Cam Rising have kind of erased a lot of the problems that Utah's had over the years. And it's not that makes it sound like there's these massive growing problems, right? Like there have been issues, namely they haven't been able to get the ball out to wide receivers a ton. There's been issues there, and that's why this year everybody was talking it up so much. You have 6 tight ends. You've got this influx of talent at wide receiver with Dorian Singer and Damian Alford and, Micah Pittman and all these other guys, Tayshaun Prince, whatever it may be. And, you're not able to do that. The reality is this offense under Kyle Whittingham, no matter what offensive coordinator it is, and you can see this from the very beginning of his time, is always going to be similar under Kyle, because Kyle is going to make things very conservative. He's going to try to make things very vanilla. He wants to control the clock. He wants to control the game, and he's doing that essentially with a run game. It all starts with the run game, and you can say that you want to develop on the outsides and you want to do all these things, but unless you really have a quarterback like Cam Rising or Tyler Huntley in his senior year where he gained that trust, Kyle really isn't going to turn over the keys to that, right? He's going to sit there and he's going to keep things very vanilla. You're going to get the screen passes. You're going to get, the out routes, you barely even get slant routes. You don't get crossers too often. You're just trying to avoid any chance where there can be a turnover. With Cam, he had complete trust in Cam. Cam was always Kyle's guy. The second he got into that system, you could see that he had true faith in him. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why that was the case in terms of why he was able to develop that trust with Kyle more than anybody. But for the most part, no matter who is at offensive coordinator, as long as Kyle Whittingham is in charge, it's going to have a similar feel. The difference this year is that you don't necessarily have that dynamic running back that does it the same way as you have in the past. Now, that's no disrespect to Mekhi Bernard. I absolutely think he's done a phenomenal job this year. I think he's still untapped in what he's able to do, and I think there's more that he can give. They haven't been able to utilize him as well as they could have. Partially, some of that is also mixing it up with somebody like a Jalen Glover, or Mike Mitchell, or Dejon Stanley to be able to help. Not just the same inside zone stuff that's always going in there. There's ways that they can develop this a little bit more to kind of help him, right? Some of that is also because you have a true freshman back there. They're loading up the box. It makes it harder for him to run. I get that. The reality here, though, is that Utah just doesn't have that every down back that they've been looking for, right? Like it's not easy. Quinton Ganther talks about it, that those types of running backs are very expensive in this NIL world, right? And that's the messaging that's kind of come out there, and it's tough, right? And so when you don't have things going well, and your running back is doing well, like don't get me wrong, Mekhi Bernard absolutely kept Utah in that Arizona State game. He absolutely has kept them in a lot of these games, whether it be Oklahoma State or any of these other games. And so he's been able to do that, but then you don't really have anything else. And so it's been tough. And so when that offense gets conservative, where you're trying to mitigate risk, and also the run game is getting stopped because whether that's the offensive line or, they're not developing in the run game or whatever it may be, you stall to a grinding halt. And you can blame the quarterback, you can blame whatever. Yes, they are factors, right? None of this is to say that Isaac Wilson doesn't need to improve. 100% he needs to improve, and we'll get into that. But there's a consistent theme here where when these things break down, it's not like this offense is suddenly going to, flip a switch and everything's going to be okay. It's never been an offense that is going to suddenly throw the ball 50 times and get it to its receivers. They may throw it 50 times, but it's not going to be effective. And it's an offense that is pretty vanilla in terms of being able to understand what it is. Opposing teams understand it. The difference is Utah has done so well over the years that it's just not been that difficult to, I don't want to say it's not been difficult. It's been harder to stop them because Utah can just do it better, right? They're the team that prides themselves in physicality in the trenches. And when you're losing that physicality in the trenches, now you're starting to see those wrinkles, or the cracks in the shield break down, and then everything starts to break down. So teams know that they can load up the box because you're going to put pressure on Isaac Wilson, who is going to be sped up, and obviously his numbers aren't as great when he's sped up. But then you're also going to limit what he's able to do when he does have the ball because they're going to be conservative. And so if you can just have your DBs, hold up on the sidelines or do different things where the safeties don't have to really respect a lot of that stuff, it makes it much more of a challenge for Utah's offense to move the ball. That's not necessarily an Isaac Wilson fault. That's not going to be a Brandon Rose fault. That's going to be any quarterback's fault in terms of this offense not moving the ball because they can't do everything that they need to, right? And that's the challenge. On top of that, now moving into the rest of the season, you've lost Money Parks. He suffered, I believe, is a shoulder injury. It kind of looked innocent when he got injured on Saturday. Didn't really make anything of it other than he was out for the rest of the game, and suddenly he's lost for the season. So don't know the full extent of that other than, he's lost for the season. It sucks for him. So that's not easy. But, you're coming into this now where you have an offense that's not moving the ball. And a lot of this is being blamed on a true freshman quarterback. And, I've talked about this many times. He's a freshman, right? And I understand people hear that. He's a freshman. But the reality is it's not easy, right? Like a year ago, he's preparing with Corner Canyon to be able to win a 6A title, right? That's what his mindset's on. He comes in spring to be able to work on that, starts doing really well, showed out in the spring game, and I understand those are vanilla and base defenses that they're going up against, but showed out well, right? Then in the beginning of the season, when he kind of gets thrown into the mix, and everybody's kind of excited about him and everything's going on, he's able to move the ball well, right? He does well against Utah State eventually once he kind of gets his bearings and everything goes smoothly. He's able to move the ball against Arizona. He's been able to move the ball. It just hasn't been able to translate to points. Even on Saturday, he moved the ball relatively decently in the first half, got them into field goal territory twice. They missed the field goals. Granted, they were deeper field goals, so it is what it is. Kyle Whittingham said it didn't matter if those field goals would have gone in. They still would have made the decision that they did to put him on the sidelines and put Brandon Rose in there. I don't know if that's, to me, I don't know if that's really the case. I think that's saving face to some extent. I think if those field goals were made, you have a different tone of the game. You're only up 13-7, but at the same time, you at least scored on 3 of your possessions, right? You had the first touchdown with Brant Keithy, who made tremendous plays to be able to get that 71-yard touchdown. But then you have 2 field goals. Yes, you want touchdowns. And so then you can come out at the end of the game and say, we scored, but we didn't get the points that we wanted to. Kyle equates field goals to losing. And he's not necessarily wrong, right? You can't just continue to kick field goals and expect to win games. Although this year, any points would be better than no points. So I think going into halftime up 13-7, you're feeling a little bit better about yourself. If Isaac is injured, maybe that still gives him shot in the arm to say, okay, you can continue to do this, but they didn't. So looking at Isaac this year. So I want to kind of break this down a little bit. And I apologize to those if you're not really into a lot of stats or the nerdy side of this kind of stuff. Now's the time probably to end. I want to kind of go a little bit deep into this, and I'm not going to try to go to the point where I bore you, hopefully. I can't guarantee that, but I want to bring in a lot of these stats to kind of show what's going on, who Isaac Wilson is, where he compares to his peers, and kind of what's going on. So looking at this just kind of as a reference point here, 6 teams this year have started a true freshman in at least I don't want to say a majority of their games, but a lot of their games, right? 4 specifically have been a majority of their games. 2 others, they're starting, they've been mixing and matching. That's DJ Lagway and, Michael Hawkins Jr. at Oklahoma. They've, split time with other quarterbacks. Lagway is essentially the starter at Florida now. So there's that. Hawkins lost it at Oklahoma. It's, back with Jackson Arnold. So they're not fully embracing that. But in total, 6 Power 4 teams this year have really embraced a true freshman. 2 varying degrees, and I'll get into that, but kind of use that as the reference point. So with that as kind of the background, Isaac Wilson this year, and I'm taking a lot of these stats from Pro Football Focus, and the reason why, there's nuances with Pro Football Focus that, it doesn't equate to everything, and not everything's perfect, but at the same time, the coaching staff up at Utah absolutely uses this stuff to measure themselves, right? And so if they're going to measure themselves with this, I want to be able to kind of use this as the approach of what's going on. So a lot of these stats are either generic stats that anybody can read up, or some of them are on Pro Football Focus, and I'll try to bring those up. But essentially what Pro Football Focus does is they try to look at every individual play, kind of assess what's going on. Is it a drop back? Is it a screen pass? Is it a play action? Was this pass a turnover worthy pass? How long does he hold on to the ball? They're evaluating everything. And so you're trying to get at least more of a complete picture than just the standard, we threw for 171 yards, threw a touchdown, completed 56% of his passes or whatever it may be. It's going a little bit deeper to say, okay, was this also, were some of his sacks or the pressures that he took on him, like he got into the pressure situation, or was it on an offensive lineman? Was it on a running back not protecting? Those types of things. And so all those things are very invaluable in terms of coming up with who a quarterback is. And in short, of these 6 quarterbacks that are true freshmen, Isaac in a lot of these categories is going to be at the lower end, right? And some of that especially has come after these last few games. If you would have evaluated him a couple weeks ago, he would have been a little bit higher, but he's still not going to be at the highest. And I'll explain some of that. But so that does show that there is room for improvement, right? Of the true freshman quarterbacks, which there are only a few, he is not still the best. And so there are reasons to believe why Kyle would want to improve, right? And especially if he's looking at these numbers. And I'm not saying that Kyle is only basing his decisions on Pro Football Focus numbers. I would hope that he's not basing his whole decisions on that. Sometimes you can get too heavily into analytics and kind of change how you're doing things, but I think these things matter. So here's where it's at. So Isaac Wilson, he's under pressure. These are under pressure situations. So, the offensive line is under attack, essentially. He's under attack. The defense is really crashing in and coming after him. He's had 52 dropbacks under pressure, which is the second most of a true freshman in the Power 4. That's a lot. The most is Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. He's had 69 pressures. They're coming at him a lot as well. And Raiola, we'll get into him, but he's considered probably the best of the true freshmen, comes in as a 5-star quarterback, was named the starter from the very beginning of the season. So he's, of all the true freshmen that have played this year, he's the one standout of that where he went into the season with the offense knowing that it is Dylan Raiola's offense, right? Most of these other players, either a player got injured, like in Isaac's case where Cam Rising got injured and now he's been inserted into it and eventually was named the starter, or there's others still mixing through that. But for the most part, nobody is in the same situation as Dylan Raiola. So his numbers may be better at times just simply because the offense is geared towards him. Everybody's built around him as the playmaker, whereas others, they've had to change things up a little bit. And I'd argue that all of these other teams, I don't want to say they're more nimble, but I think they adjust and they have a much more advantageous offense to their quarterbacks than what Utah has right now. Isaac is much more of a spread RPO type system, and Utah just isn't running that right now. And so that's kind of goes against what he does. There's some elements of who Isaac Wilson is and what he did at Corner Canyon that, although they may be similar, and Eric Kerr at Corner Canyon has adopted some of the plays that Utah runs in that system, it's treated differently and it's used in a different way. Where Isaac is I've heard from sources that Isaac is kind of flipped, right? It's like looking in a mirror where you're trying to do something a way that you have done it, and it's been flipped the other way. That's not to say that some of these things can't be improved on Isaac, but you can see why when you're getting into a system that is already a challenge and it's kind of contrary to what you've already done, what you're used to in high school, it becomes a challenge, right? And obviously that's going to be the change for any collegiate athlete. You can't expect you to run the same offense that you ran at high school. That shouldn't be the expectation. Most high school offenses are pretty generic in how they approach things, and so there's always going to be an evolution and everything, and that's partially why it takes so long for a true freshman to learn. But there's a lot of that kind of stuff, right? And so if it is a similar scheme but it's flipped, that makes it a challenge. And I don't know to the full extent of what that is, but there are certain checks or certain things and directions that he's supposed to look that have been just a little off because of that. So with that said, Isaac has had, in these pressure situations, of his 14 sacks that he's taken this year, 2 of them are credited to himself. Like, he brought the pressure on himself. Not bad, right? Looking at those other quarterbacks, Dylan Raiola has 6 that he's brought on himself. Hawkins brought 4, DJ Ladway 3, CJ Bailey, he's the North Carolina State quarterback, he's brought in 2 on himself, and the other true freshman hasn't had any sacks on himself, but honestly, his is largely because of his offensive line. This is Mississippi State, by the way. Michael Van Buren, their offensive line is absolutely just giving all the pressure to him. So you can you can credit them there. The numbers are pretty overwhelming there. In terms of the pressure responsibility, so who is responsible for developing that pressure? For Utah, the offensive line is 71.2% of that, which is the second lowest of the true freshman lines, right? So it's not been bad considering what Utah's it could be worse. Let's just say. You could have the Van Buren, which I think it's something like 94%. His offensive line is just absolutely putting him under pressure every single down, it feels like, and he's not able to effectively do what he needs to. It's tough, so it's there. So for the most part of those true freshman lines, Isaac's getting a decent amount of protection compared to his peers. Of that, 11.5% of the pressures are are on Isaac. That's actually second lowest of the true freshmen. Some of these other quarterbacks have a much higher rate. For example, Hawkins is at 28.3, DJ Lagway is at 26.1, Raiola is at 18.8, and Bailey is at 18.2. So the only lower one is Van Buren. Like I said, 3.9%, but his offensive line, once again, as I mentioned, 94%. So, he's not necessarily bringing a lot of the pressures onto himself. And so that, to an extent, leads to, him being decent in the pocket, right? Like he's understanding the assignments. He's trying to do it. There are times where he kind of steps into a mess. You saw that on Saturday. He stepped into a blindside tackle that essentially stripped him of the ball, forced a fumble, that kind of stuff. Those types of things are tough. It's the pocket awareness that's going to come. That's just a true freshman situation. That honestly is the same case for many quarterbacks until they get further into their development, right? It takes a long time to understand, the pocket awareness, trying to understand where you need to be. Isaac Wilson could have great escapability, which they say he has, and he does, but you've got to kind of understand that. It's just kind of an instinctual thing. Obviously, there's training involved with that, and there's some VR situations that you can use to kind of help with that. I know Jaden Daniels did a ton of that at LSU, which absolutely transformed his game. That's now, he talked about it recently, about how he's been able to translate that into his role as the Washington Commanders, where he's been phenomenal for them. There's tools, right? There's ways to be able to develop that. But as a true freshman, you're just not used to that, right? It's not the same as somebody in high school. Even if you're going up against some of these top high school teams, they're just not experiencing it on the same level that you're going to get it at the collegiate level, because these guys are experienced. They know what they're doing. They're working very hard to be able to take you down, and it's at a higher level, right? And so there's that. Just kind of looking at the responsibilities among all the offensive line, I just kind of found this fascinating. Left tackle and left guard have allowed 17.3% of the pressures. Right guard and center, or right guard and other, that's usually kind of a running back. That's the pass protection that way. That's 15.4%. The center and right tackle, that's 11.5%. Spencer Fano has been phenomenal for Utah this year. I think a lot of that has gone unnoticed, and I've tried to bring it up here, but he's done a really good job. And then tight ends, which generally aren't, those interior tight ends that are there for more of the pass blocking and stuff, they've only allowed 5.8% pressures. I don't really factor them in a ton. They're there for added protection, max protect situations and all that. But all in all, that's kind of the pressures that he's experiencing. In all pressure situations, he's had 69 dropbacks, which is the second most of true freshmen. Of those freshmen, he has had the worst completion percentages when pressured, but he has the third most yards. So he is getting yardage, but he is having a terrible completion percentage at 29.2%. He's also had 4 interceptions in that time. That kind of goes to show that, he's having troubles trying to get out of that pressure, and he's making bad decisions. However, even in the clean pockets, the time that he has had that, he also has 4 interceptions. So I don't know if that stat specifically speaks to that. I think it's just, bad situations. Some of the interceptions aren't created equally. We get that, all that stuff. When he is in pressure, his NFL rating is not great. It's a 22. That's very, very low. You're not playing anybody at that level, right? And so in pressure situations, that becomes tough. When he's in those same situations, he's holding on to the ball for 3.63 seconds on average, which is actually the third best time of those 6 true freshmen. Van Buren is 3.2. Dylan Raiola is 3.57. The 2 guys that are able to get it out faster than him in pressure situations. I have to imagine Van Buren at some point is just kind of chucking it around and doing whatever he can to just kind of get out of that situation as that offensive line is blown up again. Looking at the clean pocket, he's had 135 dropbacks in a clean pocket, which is the second most of a true freshman. He's the 4th best completion percentage of that group at 65.1 and the 3rd most yards. So once again, he's producing. He has a far better protection, or a far better completion percentage when he is under a clean pocket, which makes absolutely sense. If they can keep him in that pocket, he's actually really solid. right? His NFL rating goes from a 22 where it's under that pressure to a 91.7, which is actually the second worst, but better than Raiola. It's kind of a weird stats. Some of these are crazy, but the point being that clean pocket absolutely helps him, right? There's still things that he needs to improve on. For example, his average time of holding the ball is 2.47 seconds. It is the worst time of all of those 6 quarterbacks. So he's holding it on too long. Most quarterbacks, especially at the collegiate level and the college or pro level, they need that down in about 2 seconds, right? The faster you can get that ball out, the easier it's going to be for your offense, the easier it's going to be for you because that pressure's not there. Kyle Whittingham kind of used that as a way to showcase why the offensive line isn't doing as well. He said that one of the biggest reasons that the offensive line hasn't been doing as well this year is just simply because the quarterback's holding on to the ball too long. Now, some of that I agree with, yes, but I don't think that a half second longer is going. It does. A half second longer does change things, so I don't want to say that, but I think there's been other issues beyond just Isaac Wilson holding on to the ball too long. Granted, he needs to get the ball out faster, right? That's a thing that has to happen. He's not doing it as fast as his peers, at least, it's a small sample size, but he's not doing it as fast as them. So, yes, he does need to improve. But there are other issues with the offensive line as well. So, that's kind of where he's at. Clean pocket, obviously, if you give him that, you're probably going to be in a good situation. The problem is, those pressure situations are coming more and more, especially in those third down scenarios where it's just kind of a natural pressure situation anyway. They're going to load the box up more. That becomes a challenge. And so when you need to be able to move the ball, Isaac hasn't been able to do it at that level. And that's the biggest indictment on him is he's not able to do that. Now, I don't know that indictment is the right word in terms of, a hugely bad thing. I think that's just the nature of what a true freshman quarterback is going to be under is a ton of pressure. And the way that Utah has operated where they haven't had a lot of talent being able to relax that pressure in terms of, whether that's in the run game or getting off these quick passes to be able to relax them a little bit, push those safeties back, push the linebackers back. That has been a real challenge for Isaac, right? And so when you don't have an offense that can move the ball, everything gets sped up, everything gets smaller. Isaac is essentially running in a red zone offense almost all the time at this point because that's how much it's not quite that extreme, but that's how much the defense is able to kind of sink down into it and really force you. And until you're going to beat them, it's not going to happen. But the problem is Isaac is holding onto the ball too long. The offensive line is getting blown up. The run game isn't developing. The wide receivers aren't able to get to where they need to, or Isaac isn't hitting them. Everything kind of spirals and it becomes a challenge. And so you can see why that becomes such a difficult thing. So for as much as if Utah can create a clean pocket as much as possible, and that's never going to happen because every quarterback's going to experience that. Cam's going to experience that. Any of these top quarterbacks in the country are going to experience that. I mean, the reality is you have somebody like a Shadir Sanders who's always under pressure, and yet he's still finding ways to deliver. That's what separates him among a lot of these other quarterbacks, right? Is yes, he can make those plays in a clean pocket, but he's finding ways to be able to do it where he's under pressure, where he's taking a ton of sacks, where he's doing this at an always increased level of heightened awareness. That's what separates him, right? More than anything else is being able to do that and being able to get it done in a quick manner. Isaac isn't there yet, and for the most part, he hasn't really had to experience that even in high school. He had a great offensive line. A lot of them is Division I players that, already had offers. His left tackle was Ike Garcia. He came to Utah, obviously is in the system. These are guys that were very effective. There's going to be some teams that were going to put him into pressure, but for the most part, watching him while he was at Corner Canyon, this just isn't an experience that he's taken a ton. Right? There's still pressure. The pocket collapses. He takes sacks. Those things happen. But I'd say this is happening at a far higher level because it's just where he's at, right? And so it takes time. It takes some ability to get there. That's no different than a bunch of these other true freshman quarterbacks. But, that's where he probably needs – it is where he needs to improve the most. All right. So now that we've kind of looked at Isaac on its own, I want to kind of compare him with a lot of these true freshmen. And as I said, 6 have played at the Power 4 level. I didn't want to get into any deeper Group of 5. I don't think it matters at that point. You're going to get more Group of 5 teams taking a chance on a true freshman, and it's going to vary. But you're talking about kind of the higher level of football, and I know some people have arguments with that. But you're talking about the Power 4, where some of the best teams in the country are competing. It just doesn't happen that much. Kind of looking back as well, 2023, there were only 3 true freshmen that started in games. Grayson Loftus at Duke, he played 8 games. Anthony Colandrea, Virginia, played 8 games. Dante Moore, if you remember, at UCLA, played 9 games. That's it. That's kind of the number. In 2022, I went back and it was 2 true freshmen, but only one of those really was for a majority of the season. That was A.J. Swan at Vanderbilt. And then Garrett Rangel at Oklahoma State. He played for the last 3 games as a starter after Spencer Saunders got injured. So there just isn't a huge body over the last few years, especially of teams wanting to turn over their entire offense to a true freshman. And you can understand why, given everything that goes on. So looking at this, the combined record for all of these teams, or all these true freshmen, is 22-28. That's not great, right? Like, Dylan Raiola at Nebraska has the best record for a team, and that's 5-3. Obviously, if you look at his game, Nebraska's been able to be there's a lot of upward trajectory, right? I think a lot of people see Nebraska on the rise, and I think there's a lot of talent with Raiola, and people are excited about what he can bring. But at the end of the day, he's not necessarily impacting the game to the point where suddenly Nebraska is in playoff contention or contention for a Big Ten championship, right? They can still get there in theory based on everything that goes on, but it's just not kind of where they're at. And yes, Dylan Raiola did almost lead an upset over Ohio State last week. One of his biggest knocks last week was that right at the end of the game, in the time when they needed the touchdown the most, he threw an interception to a wide open safety, just hit him in stride, essentially. The safety didn't have to move, ended the game for Nebraska, and that's the type of situation that these true freshmen are going to be under, right? At the end of the day, he's played in 8 games. He's thrown for 1,700 yards, almost 1,744, has 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He's not immune to interceptions either, but he's completing it at a 66.1%, and that's been really helpful. His passer grade in Pro Football Focus is a 67.3, one of the higher ones. He's not the highest, but he's going to be there, does well there. C.J. Bailey at North Carolina State, 3-star quarterback, was not the highest rated quarterback coming out of this class. He's played in 7 games for almost 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's completing it at an impressive 67.1%. He has a passer grade of 77.2, doing well, but his team is 4-4. You kind of see a trend here. Michael Van Buren, Mississippi State, as I talked about, he's played 6 games, 1,100 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, only completing passes at a 57.2%, but his team is 1-7. It just hasn't gone well. Things aren't going well. He's passing it well. He has actually one of the higher grades of these 6, but he's not able to get the time. It's just kind of a mess all around. There's that. Isaac Wilson, 7 games, 1,200 yards exactly, 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. His is a lower 55.4%. Has the lowest, graded passing of all the quarterbacks. It hasn't been as great, and his team's 4-4. Okay. Then you get the other 2 quarterbacks. Michael Hawkins Jr., he split times with Jackson Arnold as they kind of try to figure out where they're at. Hawkins was ranked the 35th best quarterback in the country this year, according to 24/7 Sports. He's only played 5 games, hasn't really gotten a ton of starts, and so including him here isn't fully fair, but at the same time, he's done it. He's thrown for 476 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, low passing grade, his team's 4-4 as well. DJ Lagway, he's the one where I would say is starting to trend in a very positive direction. Florida has become a much different team the last few weeks once Lagway went under center. Some of that was because Graham Mertz got injured, and now, Lagway is just doing so well. He comes into the season, though, as the number one recruit in the country in terms of quarterbacks, right? 5-star QB. He's played in 7 games, thrown for 1,024 yards, although those numbers, aren't fully indicative of how well he's done the last little bit, just simply because, he did play some reps in previous games where there weren't a ton. But he has had 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Equate that's the same as somebody like an Isaac Wilson, 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 50-50. Same with like a Dylan Raiola, but essentially 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. They're all pretty much in the same area. The difference is Lagway, he has the highest passing grade at a 78.5. Once again, his team is 4-3. You're kind of sensing a trend here that no matter how talented you are, your team still isn't able to produce at the level that you would expect them to if they were different in terms of grade or class or year or classification, however you want to call them, right? Sophomore, junior, senior. Obviously, when you look at general statistics, juniors and seniors are going to lead just because they've been in the systems longer. This isn't rocket science, right? Like I'm not breaking anything here that's like suddenly, crazy, but I think that just goes to show like how different it is. And some people are going to point out redshirt freshmen. The difference there is redshirt freshmen have literally had a year where they've been able to be mentored by somebody. They've been able to, learn and be able to move forward. You see Nico Iamaleava. I'm going to mispronounce that. I'm so good at pronouncing names here on this podcast. So, for whatever reason, that's what you're going to get. You got Sam Levitt at Arizona State, 2 quarterbacks that had a year off in terms of learning and growing, and they're starting to develop. Eli Holstein at Pittsburgh, he's doing really well. You've got the last couple years, Rocco Becht at Iowa State, Noah Fafita at Arizona. He had a redshirt season before last year's breakout. Josh Hoover, redshirt season, TCU, has done tremendously well in terms of being able to pass. Their offense scores really well, as has been seen, and yet they can't do it on defense. Connor Wegman at Texas A&M, done really well, redshirt freshman. This list goes on and on of guys. Quinn Ewers at Texas. You've got a Drake May, or in the past at North Carolina was that guy. Just being a redshirt freshman completely changes the dynamics of how this goes for players. You put them in as a true freshman, and it becomes a completely different situation. Things get so much more challenging. Things are tough for these guys, and their numbers don't really bear out in the way that you want them to for a team that wants to compete. Now, a lot of these teams, we're looking at, let's say, let's go through these teams. North Carolina State, they've been good over the last few years, but I don't think anybody was expecting them to be a title contender in the ACC. Nebraska, nobody was really expecting them to be a title contender, but there was optimism that Raiola and the way that the program has been built could improve. I think they're kind of meeting their expectations, right? Mississippi State, nobody expected them. Utah, everybody expected them to win the Big 12, right? And partially, like I said, that's because the whole Cam Rising thing. Utah becomes the biggest anomaly out of this is because they were expected to do it, and so there's a lot of pressure now on Isaac to be able to lead a team to that level, when in reality, he's more along with the peers of teams that aren't there, right? Florida, they had one of the hardest schedules in the country. They weren't ever really expected to compete in the SEC. They were expected to be better. Obviously, there's the hot seat situation and whether you're going to lose a head coach. Clearly, they're not in the right mindset to be able to be competing for an SEC championship or playoffs. Oklahoma, yes, they have been good, but at the same time, they weren't ever in that mix either. You're coming into a new league. You didn't have the makeup there. All of these teams have one thing in common outside of Utah, in that they were teams that were expected to be building. They were kind of maybe a second or third tier, some maybe even lower, like a Mississippi State to some extent. These were teams that just weren't expected to do well. And so Isaac is taking the brunt of this because now he's being thrown into the mix on a team that was supposed to be a championship caliber team. And he is taking a lot of that pressure and trying to develop when, like I said, he is more alike with the peers of teams that are supposed to be building towards maybe the next year or 2 years from now, right? And so that's a lot to ask for a true freshman, especially a true freshman who is supposed to utilize Cam Rising's offense. He split reps with Cam in many of the weeks leading up to the games, not knowing if he was going to be the actual starter. There's only been a handful of games where he has known that he's going to be the starter, and he generally has performed better there. As the season's developed, it's been harder to see that. But everything has kind of been changed into, all of that, where the metrics and the understanding of this team has been resting on that. Even going into this week, where, yes, he knew he was the starter, right? Like, everybody knows he's a starter, or last week, I should say, not to confuse anybody. Then suddenly you're switching your offensive coordinator, right? Mike Bajakian comes in, and yeah, you have the same system, but you have a different play caller, and you're not doing the same things that you did leading up to a Houston team that, although bad, and you probably think that you can kind of cut corners a little bit as you try to speed up Bajakian and what he's able to do. At the end of the day, Isaac needs all those reps, and he needs all that film study, and he needs all that time to be able to develop. And so when you take somebody out of that process, it changes it. Once again, these are all excuses that you can use however you want. But like I said, he's more akin to his peers that are on teams that are trying to build towards something, not trying to salvage a team that had, championship aspirations, playoff aspirations for that matter. So pretty crazy there. Looking at this, as I mentioned, his average time holding onto the ball is one of the highest. He actually gets some of the most first downs out of all the quarterbacks. Raiola has had 83 first downs. CJ Bailey has 64, and then there's Isaac at 55. The others are below that. Granted, DJ Lagway, he's only had 35, but he hasn't played as much, and the last few games he's played a lot more, so it's hard to compare him. Michael Hawkins, kind of a similar situation. He hasn't been officially able to do it. 23 first downs. Isaac is right in line with a lot of these quarterbacks that have played a majority in terms of sacks. He's taken 14. Van Buren has taken 15. Raiola's 15. CJ Bailey's 13. Lagway's 6, but once again, lower number of games. Crazy part is Michael Hawkins has taken 12, and he's gotten the least amount of play out of all of these quarterbacks, so not great. Isaac, and by the way, any of these numbers that are on here, I'm going to have this in an article that I publish later this afternoon, so you can see that as well, just so that you don't feel like you have to completely remember everything. Not that you need to, because it is what it is, right? Of this, Isaac has had 7 passes that have been dropped by the receivers, which is 6.7%. Not a crazy amount, but he's not. It hasn't contributed that much, we'll say. His average depth of throwing, he's throwing about 10.1 yards, which is some of the higher one. Like DJ Lagway is at 12.3, Van Buren is at 11.3, and outside of that, all of the other quarterbacks are below 10. You have Raiola, who's 8.1, Bailey's at 7.6, and Hawkins is at 7.5. What that tells me, personally, is that Isaac is trying to shoot for bigger passes, right? But at the same time, Utah's really not dialing them up. Yes, you have those 2 71-yard touchdown passes, and that's going to help. Granted, his last one to Brant Keithy is not going to be included in that, simply because that pass was like a yard, 2 yards maybe, and then Keithy took it further. But to me, what this is showing is that these other teams like Raiola, they're doing what they can to be able to give him short passes. They're doing what they can to give him that confidence that I've talked about, where you need to give that freshman confidence, right? You're not expecting him to take these 30-yard shots downfield every single time. That's irresponsible. Now, with that, you do need to take those, right? You got to show those big plays. If not, once again, the defense relaxes, and it's really easy to do that. But at the same time, you have to scheme up these offenses to a point where you're giving this offense or the quarterback some time and giving him some confidence, right, to be able to do that. And so those shorter passes, whether it be in play action passes, which obviously play action is going to help a true freshman because it helps them develop a little bit more, and the stats bear that out. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. Screen passes can help because it gets the ball out faster. All of those things matter. And, the fact that Isaac is higher on that list of ADOT shows that they're trying to give him a little bit more depth, but not really helping him. And so you've got to be able to develop something where he's getting quicker passes, getting things so he can think faster, where he can get the ball out of his hands faster so he's not at that 2.86, average time. Get him closer to what, maybe a Dylan Raiola is, even just a 2.66, right? That doesn't feel like a ton, but it's enough that it changes the kind of the trajectory of what you're able to do with quick passes. You saw the beginning of the game against Houston. Mike Bajakian was calling up a lot of, those quick plays, right? He was trying to get the ball out of Isaac's hands fast, where Isaac snaps it and almost immediately he's passing the ball out. That tunnel screen pass to Brant Keithy was almost immediately, right? Snap the ball, look to Keithy, throw the ball, immediately go, right? That's under that 2.86 seconds, guaranteed. You've got to be able to get some of those things similar because Isaac has an arm to do it, right? At the beginning of the year, it was more he doesn't have the right touch. And there's still some of that, but I don't think that's really been the biggest issue recently. It's more just he's being pressured and he's holding on to the ball too long. If you can give him those quicker passes, if you can give him more comfortability back there, he's shown that he can do it, right? His touch is developing. It's getting there. He's working with these receivers to understand how they work, and it becomes a much easier situation. So that's just kind of where it's at. You could go back and look at all of these other freshmen over the last few years in 2023, 2022. The numbers all kind of bear out, right? Last year, the teams were a little bit better in terms of how they finished, but none of them had less than 5 losses. They did well to their own extent, but they weren't able to help their teams to a level that was going to get them where they needed to, right? Even Grayson Loftus at Duke last year, he didn't come on till November as their starter. Dante Moore was their starter for most of the season and struggled, right? You could see some stuff brewing there where you could have some development, but he wasn't ready for that moment. These last few years are all the same. You can go back and look at it, and if I wanted to go further back, I'm sure it would bear out the same way. You just don't see a true freshman quarterback come out there and light up the college football world. The people that are lighting up the world as college quarterbacks are generally the ones that are in the more veteran years, whether it be sophomore, junior, senior. Anymore, a lot of these guys are trying to get out after 3 years, so maybe it's a redshirt freshman, sophomore, junior, whatever that may be. The reality is if you can just give a guy 1 year under, to be in the system and understand how it goes, have a mentor of another quarterback and the coaching staff, it's tremendous how different these players have been. A lot of these redshirt freshman quarterbacks that are highly ranked, they do really well that redshirt freshman season. There's a lot more trust into that. I've documented a lot of these guys. There's far more of these players that are freshmen or redshirt freshmen that come in there. They're actually on teams that are competing for something, whether that's Iowa State, Arizona, TCU, Indiana, Texas A&M, Texas, all these teams. When you've turned it over, there's a lot more confidence there for a redshirt freshman than a true freshman, and the numbers bear that out, right? And so I think, you can say what you want about where this is at. You can even look at Utah's true freshman QBs, and I'll kind of get out on this one. Tyler Huntley was a true freshman QB in 4 games, only had 9 completions. He was there just for a few snaps, right? So you can't really count him. Travis Wilson and Jordan Wynn are really the only two that got extensive play outside of Jason Shelley, but he was at the end, and I'm not going to factor him in just to kind of avoid getting too down into the weeds. But Travis Wilson in 2012, he started 7 games, played in 11, had a 62.6% completion rate, only threw for 1,300 yards. That goes once again to what I was saying with you had an effective run game that allowed things to be better. Had 7 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I've broken this up into every single game. They lost more than they won, right? Of his 7 starting wins, I think he was 3-4. Some of those teams were bad. Like at Colorado, they won. Colorado was 1-11 that year. So, you can take it for what it is. But most of the time, he's just not throwing for a ton of yards, right? Isaac has actually thrown for more yards than Travis did in his freshman season. Granted, Travis has a higher completion percentage, but they just weren't doing a ton because they had an effective run game that helped them. Jordan Wynn, 2009. He played in 6 games, obviously was inserted into Wyoming, coincidentally enough, on Halloween, and finished the season throwing 58% completion percentage, 1,300 yards. Once again, still not a high number. 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But for the most part, his was a little bit different too, in that he kind of had the Cam Rising effect, right? You throw him in, switch him out for Terrence Kane, and suddenly there was kind of this breath of fresh air, right? That game against Wyoming, he only threw 82 yards, threw 1 touchdown, but they get the win, 22-10. Everything feels better, right? They move on. Then they go to New Mexico, which was only 1-11 that season, and they get an absolute dominant win, 45-14. He throws for almost 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, had 1 interception. But you're starting to see things progress, right? Granted, he'd had 6 games before that to develop, or 7 games to develop, and so he got some time that Isaac hasn't, right? And it continued to go. There's the TCU game. Nobody wants to talk about that one. You have San Diego State that he beat. Didn't really have a ton of big numbers, but the ball moved. Once again, running backs did really well. Lose to BYU, which was an 11-2 team that year. He threw for almost 200 yards, had 1 interception. Honestly, was one of his worst games. Those last 3 games in that section, he was throwing at 50% completion rate. I mean, it just was not great for him. Even though they got a win over like San Diego State, it just didn't work out for him. Jordan Wynn, though, has his breakout game in the bowl game where he throws for 338 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, an impressive 72.2% completion rate. Go on to win against Cal, by 10 points. And that was kind of the turning point for him, is once he had that time, all of a sudden, Jordan Wynn, I don't want to say that there wasn't expectations from him and there wasn't optimism about him, because there was. But going into that Cal game and then seeing how he produced there, suddenly everything changed, right? Everybody felt very confident in him, but he also had time. He was able to develop, and he was able to kind of get in there in a way that they schemed it towards him. That's the same thing for all these situations, right? Like he played in all these games in the regular season, 5 to be exact in the regular season, but he'd had time to develop. And even then, he still struggled at a high rate. So, I've seen on Twitter a lot of people come on and be like, oh, well, Jordan Wynn wasn't this way, or Travis Wilson wasn't this way, or Tyler Huntley wasn't this way. Tyler Huntley had happy feet until nearly the very end of his time there, right? There was a lot of frustrations with him being too quick to try to run until his junior, senior year, and wasn't really staying settled in the pocket, different things that way. It's easy to rewrite history and say, oh, these true freshmen did so well. And yes, there's aspects of them that they did better, right? And maybe they had more composure, or maybe they had this. It doesn't bear out, right? And I would argue that, yes, Jordan Wynn felt like more of a breath of fresh air just simply because of what was going on, similar to kind of Cam Rising, but at the same time, the performances just weren't all that great either. Yes, they got some of these wins, but at the same time, different competition. Yes, I know Utah just lost to Houston, so I'm not going to sit here and say that it was that different. But just don't rewrite history, right? I don't think that there's all of this stuff where you can go back in Utah history and say, oh, this true freshman quarterback was so much better than Isaac. Yeah, there's elements, right? I hope that I've presented some of that to you to kind of give that understanding. But at the end of the day, yes, Isaac Wilson has to improve. And if he is given the starting role still moving forward in the BYU game, they have to do things to be able to help him, right? They have to be able to develop. They have to be able to move forward and do what they need to. But at the same time, you have to remember he is a true freshman. And I know there's a tweet out there of mine that everybody wants to kind of link to, probably BYU fans more than anybody. But the reality is you're judging Isaac Wilson based on who you think he should be based off of Cam. And I understand in your head, you're saying, oh, he's a true freshman, but you still want him to be better. And yes, he should be better. And yes, of his peers that I hope I've showed you, he hasn't performed as well. But at the same time, to fully cast him off is not fully fair to him. I think it's an unrealistic expectation to everybody, and I understand that you want something more, right? Like, nobody wants to sit here in your entertainment and watch a team go 4-4, lose to the 4 easiest teams, essentially, that were on your schedule, and have no answers. But at the same time, I don't know that Brandon Rose is an answer for you. That's not to say that he can't be. We just haven't seen his body of work. And the fact that Utah felt confident that Isaac was better, kind of shows where they're at. And I understand their evaluations this week, and I understand where they want to go. But, the writing's on the wall, right? Like, I don't think you're getting anything back for this season. This is a season where you're hoping to build for the next year, and I know you want to give confidence and you want to finish strong in these last 4 games. The reality is these last 4 games aren't going to be easy. You have BYU, Iowa State, Colorado, UCF. This isn't going to get any easier. And I don't know that necessarily changing your quarterback is going to help that, right? There may be moments where Brandon Rose may be better, and maybe that confidence and just time seeing systems helps, right? And that can help that in that regard. But I think Utah is just in a world of hurt no matter which direction they go, right? This is not a knock on Brandon Rose. This is not a knock on Isaac Wilson. I just think Utah is in a world of hurt, and they don't have any clear answers, and they want sudden answers that aren't going to come. That's where it is. So at this point, Kyle has to kind of figure out, how do you want to finish out the year? If you truly believe in Isaac Wilson and you believe that he is your starter moving forward, in my opinion, you have to stick with him. Stick with the lumps, stick with everything, do what you can to scheme things up for him. Yes, you're going into a hostile BYU game. Obviously, the emotion is going to be stronger knowing that his older brother went there. Personally, I don't think that that's a huge motivating factor, but, Isaac's going to want to do that. But I don't know that helps you if you just suddenly move to Brandon Rose. There's some of the throws that he made that weren't great. And I don't think that giving him a full week is necessarily going to change that. That's just where Utah's at. So we're going to end on that. I know this one's an extra long and there's a lot of numbers thrown at you. But hopefully that kind of paints the picture a little bit. Just kind of gives an understanding of where this team is at, where Isaac Wilson is at, where he's at according to his peers, where Utah is at according to the teams like it, right? They're an anomaly in terms of where their projections were at and kind of where they're at now. But, you kind of have to own up to where you're at as a team and as a program. You're in a rebuild despite what you wanted it to be. And, unless you kind of figure that out and kind of scheme towards that, Utah's either going to hurt themselves in the future or, other things are going to happen that make it a challenge. So we'll go out on that. Next week we'll start game week again with Monday talk with Kyle Whittingham and kind of leading up to that with another Thursday of recapping or previewing BYU. So we will chat later. Have a great one.